Hello there, welcome to Ukrainian Media Podcast. This season we are talking about German-Ukrainian relations. I am Elena Solodovnikova, and it's a great privilege to me to welcome Rouven Stubbe, Consult Energy and Climate Policy. Hello.
Hello, happy to be here.
For the time being, heating season for Ukraine difficult to keep to energy system in working order. The attacks of Russian keep on. What new support programs is Germany currently developed to help Ukraine energy workers?
Germany continues to support Ukraine both bilaterally and also multilaterally through the Ukraine Energy Support Fund. Germany already contributed 375 million euros to the Energy Support Fund, which is the largest single contribution. In total, it's around 800, almost 900 million euros, I think, the fund by now. Also, Germany is directly, bilaterally providing additional support to Ukraine through modernization and decentralization of the electricity system. Germany has a focus in its support on renewable storage and smart grids, but it's also supporting with donations by private companies and publicly and private utilities, for example, through spare parts, also for thermal power plants, for grid systems, also including spare parts that are very difficult to obtain on the open market because they're in high demand right now. But where these companies have spare parts in their storages, for example, in their inventories, they're sending these to Ukraine. Both the German government and also German companies are continuing this support through these measures I mentioned.
Could you elaborate the private companies involved in this process,
Mhm.
voluntary or not?
A large part is actually voluntary, yes. And some companies, of course, use this to promote themselves, to put out their names. But actually, there are also contributions where companies don't really put this very big in a big announcement. They just want to contribute and donate. And a large part is actually voluntary. Yes, it's coordinated by the government, but the contributions are voluntary.
Well, in your opinion, to what extent is Germany interested in implementing joint energy projects in post-war Ukraine? Are there any specific plans in energy strategy of Germany about that?
Yes, there's a focus on Ukraine both as a renewable energy exporter, both through cables, so electricity exports. Ukraine has a large potential for renewable energy that's currently and before the war was underutilized. And there are quite a lot of German companies that see that potential, that want to invest. Some have already invested, including during the war, but the appetite varies between different companies, whether they invest now or they want to wait. So a lot of companies are also just waiting to invest post-war. But there is an interest in investments in renewable energy. Then there are also let's say, the larger plans for production and exports of hydrogen. But there I would be a bit more cautious to assess how realistic, at least in the short term, these investments are, considering the difficult economic questions around hydrogen production and transport.
Yeah, hydrogen production in Ukraine can become the key tool for Ukrainians and Europeans, the independence from Russian energy resources and a rapid transaction of the use of green energy. For Ukraine, this is also the chance to become the main energy supplier of the fuel of future for Europe. Actually, could you talk a little bit about approaches of hydrogen production, um, about details? Why we need hydrogen and why Ukraine is expected to be the main supplier of it.
So, okay, let me give a little bit of a background here. So the main idea of why hydrogen is so much talked about is because it is a gaseous fuel that can be used to decarbonize hard to decarbonize sectors. So where electricity directly cannot be used or not as easily be used to turn these processes carbon free. this, of course, only works if the hydrogen production itself is carbon free. So the vast majority of hydrogen production these days is from natural gas, in which process the CO2 is released. So this is gray hydrogen. And green hydrogen would be the production from green electricity through electrolysis. So electrolyzing water to hydrogen and oxygen. This process is very energy intensive. So you need a lot of green electricity to produce hydrogen. It's also capital intensive. So these electrolyzers, these devices are quite expensive to produce and to invest in. So it is an open question, I would say still, how many processes indeed will be decarbonized through green hydrogen. So anywhere where you can use green electricity directly, it will probably be cheaper to use electricity directly. But for some sectors, and here often we talk about steel production, but also some transport applications, for example, shipping, aviation, it's very difficult to use electricity directly. So for these processes, probably we will need green hydrogen to decarbonize them. And the question will be, how expensive will it be, and to what in what scope, and also how soon will we actually do this? Because now it's still too expensive to use green hydrogen for these processes. There are, of course, some demonstrations, some research plans, but we don't see this big takeoff yet, the scale up of the hydrogen industry that some people were expecting.
But you are cautious about hydrogen implementation only about the price, or also because of the war in Ukraine, about the war risks?
I think the main reason is the price, and because if it's not economical to do this anywhere in Europe, it will probably also not be economical in Ukraine. Of course, the war risk is an added risk factor, and hence also a cost factor if companies would have to obtain risk insurance, for example, to invest in this in Ukraine. So it depends a lot whether this will be economical at all in Europe and at what time it will be. It will be economical once the other alternatives, so the dirty alternatives, are more expensive with higher carbon prices in the European emissions trading system. But this price developments in the ETS, in the emissions trading system, are of course uncertain. There's an expectation that they will go up, but we don't know how quickly. And so first question is, when will it be economical in Europe in general? And then second question will be, what will be the price advantage, if at all, in Ukraine? And of course, war risk will be one factor in this price as well. So a lot depends about the concrete situation in post-war Ukraine, how certain will be some sort of peaceful settlement of the war.
Well, and my next question will be about the dirty energy. Ukraine is slated for increasing its nuclear energy potential, including the construction of traditional nuclear power plants. Germany has abandoned nuclear energy in its country, but will be interested in cooperation with Ukraine partners to develop new technologies in this area and implement projects in Ukraine for German companies. What rumors about it? I think, yes, it is very risky, because today Russians attack shelter in Chernobyl, you know that. But
yes, also
in the
occupation
future,
of Zaporizhzhia, the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, with a lot of risks that we see as well. So two things that I think I want to mention here. One is that on the German side, there are quite a lot of uncertainties. We have elections coming up in Germany. Different parties have different positions on nuclear power. Some parties, including the Conservative Party, which is leading the polls right now, is more open to nuclear power than the current government. And there are some ideas of going back to nuclear power, whether that means reopening the closed plants. There are some discussions about that, or even investing in new nuclear power plants. But this remains to be seen. I think this is really an open discussion that needs to happen after the elections in coalition talks, etc., in Germany. Then on the Ukrainian side, I think there's also some question marks there. Yes, we see these big announcements by the Ministry of Energy in Ukraine, by Ukrainian, by the company that's running the nuclear power plants, to invest in additional nuclear power plants, both traditional large units and also small modular reactors. And these are really big announcements, but I think I'm still a bit skeptical on the economics of it all. So can Ukraine and the Ukrainian government really mobilize the necessary financial means to invest in these plans? And also from a labor force perspective, does Ukraine still have enough nuclear engineers to really conduct this large scale construction that would be really unprecedented in recent years and decades, and really going back to a big construction boom like during Soviet times in Ukraine.
But is it a big problem for the world about the specialists in nuclear power plants building? Because we can involve specialists from all the world.
Well, if you look globally, what countries are constructing the most nuclear power plants? It's Russia and China. Yeah. You probably don't want to cooperate with these countries in building your nuclear industry, and neither do most of the Western countries. There are other countries where there are some new construction of nuclear power plants: US, UK, France, but actually all of the Western countries and nuclear companies are really struggling to scale up investments in nuclear, like in the past, in the 70s and 80s. And it's not the only reason, but one reason is really this shortage in labor force in really specialized nuclear engineers, because we haven't really built a large number of nuclear power plants in recent decades in Europe and the US. And going back is more difficult than one thinks, because it's really a technical super project to build a nuclear power plant. And a lot of the projects that we see now in France, in the UK, in the US, they're going over time, they're going over budget. So they're really struggling.
Mm-hmm. But Germany was the country that convinced us that green energy is the future. Many years during the Angela Merkel term. How well did it work out? What are the disadvantages? Because you told that was some conversation about back to the dirty energy.
Well, I think the move towards green energy, to renewables in Germany is relatively successful. We have now, in the last year, we had more than 50% of electricity produced from renewable energy. But it is not as fast as the plants were, or the plants still are. We're still behind target. And I think one of the main bottlenecks is really permitting. So really getting approval of wind parks, of solar parks. And there's a lot of local opposition to these projects, not everywhere, but in quite a lot of places, because people don't think that wind parks look nice in their backyard, or they have some other concerns. And also there's a lot of, if I may say, mobilization by certain media outlets that put out arguments, some of them maybe not very genuine arguments against construction of wind and solar parks. And this kind of local resistance, and then also just bureaucracy, getting an approval for the permits, for the grid connection, etc. This really slows down a lot of the projects, and that's why we see kind of construction being slower than planned.
Okay, I never think about how this wind power station looks like. As for me, that is amazing. Amazing looks like.
I like the view when I take a train out of Berlin and I pass the big wind parks. I think they're impressive, but some people don't like the view, apparently.
Yeah. Could you talk about which the modern energy technologies are being most actively developed in Germany? Are they capable to compensating for the energy losses in the country due to the separation of Russia gas?
Well, we replaced Russian gas with American gas, with LNG, not just American, but large part of it coming from the US and other places of the world as well. But of course, that's not the long-term solution that we want. This is another fossil carrier. Um, there are some developments. Actually, currently we have some interesting, well, one interesting project, actually quite close to Berlin, where the first ultra high wind turbine is being constructed with, from the top of my head, I think it's around 300 meters high, so about twice as high as current wind turbines. And this is a demonstration project, so it remains to be seen whether how well it will work, how much it will cost, etc. But the basic idea is to have a second layer of wind turbines, so you could build these turbines between existing turbines in the same area. You don't have to go out and get permits for new areas. So this is kind of trying to get around this bottleneck of getting permits for new areas, and then generating more electricity from the higher up wind. And this higher up wind is also more consistent. So you have less variation in the electricity generation, which means you need to invest less in energy storage, which is expensive. And yeah, that's one concrete example that's being developed right now. That's really interesting. It's quite, from what I've heard, quite difficult from an engineering point of view, how to put up this turbine, because there are no cranes that have this size. So you need to come up with another mechanism of putting up the tower and the turbine. But it's really interesting and kind of cutting edge practical research now at the demonstration stage. On another kind of angle, there's a lot of research on heat pumps being developed. So this kind of more not on the electricity generation side, but on demand side. So optimization and continued research and development for more efficient decarbonized heating, and some developments also in geothermal energy.
So, by all in all, the Russian gas rejection is not problem now, or it's discussing.
It largely in the public discussion by now, it's kind of not a big scare anymore. There was a big scare initially when Germany had this shortage of gas and was rushing to build the LNG terminals. By now, we replaced it. The LNG gas is more expensive, but it works. It replaces the Russian gas. And now the discussion is more about energy affordability, actually. So because prices have increased, people feel it in their pockets, and there's a discussion about energy affordability, but not so much about shortage. So I think it's also an important discussion, of course, how to keep energy affordable, but it's less of an extreme situation as the risk of shortage that was expected in 2022, for example.
I mean that people in Germany who nostalgic about that. Oh, Russian gas was so less expensive. Do you know some people who
Yes.
talk in this way?
Yes, there are. There are political parties that try to capitalize on this feeling, and that argue that if they get elected, they want to go back, negotiate with Russia, and get Russian gas again. And also, I think there are some companies that, some of them openly, some of them maybe less openly, but behind closed doors would say that yes, it would be good to go back to Russian gas because some of the very energy intensive industries are struggling with their costs being profitable, and some of their business models were based on using cheap Russian gas, and now yes, they have problems, and so yes, they're both on kind of general societal discussions and in politics, and also on the business side, there are some voices that want to go back to Russian gas, but fortunately, there are also strong voices arguing very strongly against that.
Yes, fortunately for Ukraine. For the end, could you tell about the main directions of German energy strategy that will be priority in the next 10 years?
Yes, so on the one hand, the strategy is to continue and also accelerate the rate of investments in renewable energy, mostly wind and solar. There are big plans, especially also for offshore wind. We also have several gigawatts of offshore wind in the German North Sea mostly, but there are plans to expand this massively, actually, to such an extent that now there is some difficulties to coordinate which areas can still be channels for the ships to get to the harbors like Hamburg, and what areas can be really all filled with offshore wind turbines. So that's a big part, but also onshore wind and solar will be continued to be expanded. Then I think energy storage will play a larger role going forward, because as you integrate more and more renewables, you of course you need more storage as well. And also expanding transmission. So a lot of the renewable generation, especially for wind, is in the north. Of course, the offshore in the North Sea, but also a lot of the onshore wind is more in the north of Germany. And a lot of the industries are in the west and the south of Germany. So expanding transmission to get the electricity to where it's needed. And that's a big part of the strategy. And then there's a part that's kind of still halfway missing. So there's a part to invest in new hydrogen-ready gas power plants. So power plants that will first run on natural gas, but then in the future possibly be used with hydrogen. And these flexible gas power plants are needed also to kind of balance the generation from renewables, and also to exit completely from coal-fired power generation. But there's a basic strategy that this should happen, but there's still not a very concrete implementation plan, let's say, and capacity mechanism for how to finance the construction of these gas power plants. This was a big debate in recent months, and the current government had some draft laws, but when the government collapsed, they didn't manage to pass this before the elections.